Hello class, welcome to Programming Logic with Python. I hope you guys enjoyed your spring break. This week we are in week 8. We're going to be learning about lists and tuples. So for this week, instead of having two separate videos, one for the homework walkthrough and one for the content sort of like overview, I kind of figured I'd combine them both because at least for this week's content, lists and tuples are kind of straightforward. We've worked with lists before, and tuples are just like another form of a list. And basically this week we are still using the same lists that we're familiar with, but we're just manipulating the lists. Same goes with tuples. So the methods that we're going to be using to manipulate these lists are just add-ons to what we've already learned. So that's why I'm not going to create a whole separate video for that, because it's really just like typing the list name like this, and then doing a period, and then putting whatever add-on you want to put. And we're going to go through that in this specific lab activity using the list methods. So yeah, let's start with this. Lab activity 5.2 using the list methods. So for steps for completion, you guys can read all of this. It's just kind of telling you what we're going to be doing, what methods we're going to be using, where we currently sit at. So if you guys notice, this is not the typical overlay that we usually see on most of our labs. We have seen this before, but I think only once. So this is essentially, just think of it as a command prompt window. And like if you guys were to go on your own computer and then like on the bottom left, if you have a Windows computer, just type in CMD and then your command prompt will come up. It's the same thing here. So if you guys remember all the way from week 1 where we learned about how to execute Python programs, it can be done in two ways. The first way is through what they call the Python interpreter. And the Python interpreter is really just a different version of a command prompt. And the other way is to write the program in a notepad, like a text file, save it as a .py file, and then go into your command prompt and execute that program by calling its name. So those are the two ways to execute Python programs. The latter is used typically when you have a program that has a lot of lines of text and that it's relatively too long to be executed solely in the command prompt window. But we could run Python code through the command prompt window or the Python interpreter itself. So that's what we're doing here. We're just running lines of code in the Python interpreter, and we're doing that because all we're really doing is we're going to create a list, and our list is going to be called berries. We're going to populate that list with certain elements. In this case, we have strawberry, blueberry, blackberry, cranberry, and then we're going to start manipulating that list using list methods. So steps for completion, the first thing they want you to do is create a list called berries. So type in berries equal, and then we are going to assign it the elements that they name. So it's very important to remember that a list, when we create a list, when we have to read code and figure out what things are which, a list will always be enclosed within square brackets. So I'm going to start my list off with a square bracket, and inside of it, even though these elements are not specifically shown to be enclosed with quotation marks, they are technically strings because like they're the name of a fruit. So we are going to enclose it in strings because else Python is going to return an error. And then every element that we include in our list has to be separated with a comma, so just don't forget that. So I'm just going to type this out. and we're going to close it with a square bracket. And then if we were to write this code in a text file, we would just press, we'd go to the new line, we'd press enter, and then continue writing our code. When I press enter here, so there was a slight delay. I don't know if you guys saw that. What happened there was Python took the list, saved it into memory, and now if I were to call that list by just typing in the name of the list, berries, that's all I have to type. You see a red line right here. It says out, meaning that's like Python's outputting text to me, the user, and it's outputting the contents of my list. So everything I wrote up here is shown here. It just means that Python remembers the list, and currently this is all the elements that pertain to that specific list. So we're going to end up changing like this output. We're going to add stuff, take stuff out, replace stuff. So far, if you guys have that, that's good. So let's see. Okay, so step one, we're going to change the contents of this list using various available methods. The first method they want us to use is the append method. So they want us to add the value raspberry to the list of berries. So whenever you're using a list method, I briefly mentioned it, you type the name of the list, so in this case it's berries, you do a period at the very end, and then whatever method you want to use, you type it here. So in this case they want us to use the append method, so I'm just going to type append, and then don't forget it does have parentheses, and inside of the parentheses is where we put our argument. And the argument here is we want to add a value of raspberry. So if I want to add a element to this above list, I have to remember, okay, this above list is filled with strings, and if I want to add raspberry, which is technically a name of something, so it's a string, I have to enclose it in quotation marks. So that's what I'm going to do here. So I have my method right here, its set of parentheses, and inside of it, whatever I want to, the argument for that method. So in this case, it's raspberry. So I'm saying append, meaning like add to the end of something, the word raspberry to the list of berries. And then if I press enter, Python's going to take it in. It's not going to return anything to me, but now if I were to just call the name of the list, raspberry is the output. It's going to give me the same output, but notice it's a little bit longer because raspberry was added to the very end of the list. So that's number one. So number two, using the built-in extend method, extend an empty fruits list from the berries list that you created previously. Okay, so the extend method is, I did include that in the PowerPoint, so I would recommend looking at it. It's not complicated, but for here it could be a little bit confusing because they say use the built-in extend method, but first, before you use that, you actually have to create the empty list that they're asking for, so that's fruits. And to do that, it's the same way we created our list up here, except instead of adding elements to our list, we're just going to leave it empty. And it doesn't mean do fruits equal nothing. It means do fruits equal, you still need your close brackets or your square brackets, and then press enter. So there was nothing in there. You notice the square brackets kind of moved. Python just moved it itself. So now if I were to just do fruits, it's going to output nothing. That means it's empty. So now if I want to use the built-in extend method to extend an empty fruits list from the berries list that you created, the way they worded it could be a little bit confusing. What you want to do is you want to use the method with fruits, the fruits list. So you do fruits dot and then the method, and in this case it's extend, and then inside of it is where we're going to put the list of berries. So berries, which we already know is a list up here, is actually the argument that we're using for the extend method. And then obviously it's not going to return anything, but now if I call the fruits list, instead of being empty as it was up here, it now contains the contents of the list of berries. So I have the list of berries that has these 5 elements, and I also have the list of fruits that has the same 5 elements. So now, number 3, insert mangoes into the fruits list at index 2 using the built-in method insert. So I do believe we've used insert before, so you guys are probably familiar with this. So because I want to manipulate the list of fruits, I'm going to start with typing fruits. I'm going to follow that with the period, and then the method in this case is going to be insert. So when they say index 2, we have to remember that when we're manipulating a list, each element in the list has an index placement. So if I look at the list of berries up here, strawberry is actually at index level 0, because every list starts at index level 0 on the leftmost side. So strawberry is 0, blueberry is 1, blackberry is 2, and cranberry is 3. So if I want to manipulate, or if I want to add something at index level 2, I would write 2 right here. That's going to be the first argument that I'm giving this method. And then the second one is going to be whatever I want to insert at that level. So in this case, it's going to be the string of mangoes. And that's kind of how they type mangoes. Okay. And I press enter. And then if I want to see the actual list to make sure I put it in the right place, I'm just going to type in fruits. So now my list grew even more. So I have strawberry at index level 0, blueberry at index level 1, and now we have mangoes at index level 2, which is what they wanted. So that's great. Notice blueberry and blackberry still exist in the list. Just because I moved or I inserted a element between the two doesn't mean it removed that element. It just pushed it over. So let's move on to number 4. So now we're going to remove an element at index level 1 from the fruits list using the built-in method pop, and we're going to replace it with apples using the insert built-in function. Okay. So first we have to remove the element at index 1 using the pop method. So we're using 2 methods here. So to do that, we're still manipulating the list of fruits, and we're going to do fruits period, and in this case it's going to be pop, and then all we have to do for this is tell Python which element index we want to remove. So if I want to remove 1 from my list of fruits up here, in this case it's going to be blueberries that gets removed. I'm just going to do 1, close, press enter, so blueberry got removed. So now if I go to, they want me to insert apples in its place. So I'm going to go to fruits dot insert, and remember it's at index level 1 where blueberry originally existed, but it doesn't exist there anymore. And now I just want to place apples there. Close that, press enter, and now if I go to fruits, I have strawberry, I have apples, mangoes, blackberry, cranberry, raspberry. So blueberry was not pushed over like we saw when we originally used the insert method. Pop completely removed it and then replaced it with apples when we used the insert method after the fact. So now the very last one, which is number 5, they want us to sort the elements in the fruits list by using the built-in method sort. With keyword arguments. They want us to set the key argument to none and the reverse argument to false. Okay, so they give us what they want us to include in the parentheses, so you don't have to think about that, because they haven't really taught us specific arguments with sort, so they're just literally giving us the syntax. All you have to really know how to do is type whatever list name we're going to manipulate in this case. So in this case it's fruits, period, we're going to use the sort function, and then we're really just going to type what they gave us in this last sentence, not word by word, but You just kind of have to interpret it. They did highlight the words they want you to use, so it's key. So set the key argument to none. When they say that, when they say set a variable to a specific value, in this case key is our variable and our value is none. So I'm going to do key equals none, and it's not going to be in quotation marks. Notice it changed colors. It's like a different shade of green. That's fine. Just leave it like that. And reverse, and I do use a comma here because it's two separate arguments. It's not one whole argument, because they included the and right here. So that tells me it's two separate ones. And then they want us to do a reverse argument to reverse. Reverse being the kind of variable in this case, and then the value being false, which is Boolean, so it's going to change colors. And then that's it, and then we just press enter. Now if we do fruits, notice that it changed the order of our elements. So previously the list started with strawberries, apples, mangoes, blackberry, cranberry, raspberry, but now it's gone into alphabetical order, starting with apples, blackberry, cranberry, mango, raspberry, strawberry. That's all it really did. It just rearranged the elements. If I press the check marks here, it should give me, yep, okay. So that was this lab. That's using list methods, very straightforward. I didn't, as you guys noticed, it's really just knowing whatever list you want to manipulate and then doing a period and then typing the method you're going to be using. Obviously inside of the parentheses you have to type your argument correctly, but aside from that, methods are not difficult. So that's kind of why I didn't want to create a whole nother video going over methods, because I figured I'd just take some time to explain it here and it'd be a little bit easier for you guys. So that's this. I believe we only had one more assignment to do, which was lab activity 5.6, so using tuple methods. Okay, so start assignment. Just wait for this to load. Okay, so given a tuple, find out the number of times a string recurs. And if you guys want to know what a tuple is, I did include that in the PowerPoint. It's very simple. It's similar to a list, but you can't. It's basically like immutable. So once the list is what it is, you can't start like changing the elements. But I do explain it a little bit more, and like a list is typically surrounded with square brackets, like all of its elements, but a tuple uses the regular parentheses. So given a tuple, find out the number of times a string occurs. They want us to write a script that uses tuple methods to count the number of elements in a tuple and the number of times a particular element appears in a tuple. So just based off that, you guys are noticing that we're using tuple methods because tuple has its own set of methods, and we're not changing the elements per se. We're really just like we're sticking with the elements that currently exist, and we're gathering data from that. So we're, in the first case, we're counting the number of elements that exist in our tuple. So if our tuple had like 9 elements, this specific tuple method would count it for us without us having to go into the actual code and type and count the methods ourselves. And then this other thing that they want us to do is count the number of times a particular element appears on a tuple. So if we have a repeating element that appears, Python will count it for us. So if we go to steps for completion, they want us to initialize. Oh, I had the code written out. I just realized that. So I'll get rid of that. Actually, I'm going to leave this. Okay. They want us to initialize a tuple as shown in snippet 5.37, which is essentially what this is. You're just copying and pasting. And then using a tuple method, using a tuple method to count the number of times the cope element appears in the tuple cars and assign it to the variable fav. Yeah, okay, so we can start off with fav and set it equal to something because we already know whatever we're going to write is being assigned to that variable. And then inside of it, we think of it as a list. So the list, well, it's not a list, it's a tuple. But in this case, pretend it's a list. Our list is called cars, and it has these elements. So if I want to manipulate that list with a method, in this case a tuple method, then I have to call the name of that tuple or list. So it's cars. And then I do a period. Same syntax. Now in this case they want us to count the number of times the cope element appears in the tuple cars. So they don't specifically tell you the name of the method they want you to use, but they kind of do. So using the tuple method, remove this 2, and the name of the tuple method is count. So count, and then inside of it, they want you to count the number of times cope appears. So we're just going to type that within quotation marks because it's in quotation marks up here. Just because it's 1 quotation mark up here and 2 down here doesn't really make a difference. Both of them can be used for strings. So that's number 2. Number 3, using a tuple method to calculate the length of the tuple cars. Assign it to the variable amt, which is like amount. So same thing, because I already know everything I'm going to type is going to be assigned to this variable. I'm going to type it first, amt equals, and then they don't explicitly tell you the name of the method, but they kind of do. Length right here. They want you to calculate the length of the tuple cars. So we have used length before. The syntax is len, then the open parentheses, and then inside of it we're gonna put the list that we want to check the length of. In this case, well, it's not a list, it's a tuple. In this case, it's cars. Okay. So if the number of times the cope element appears in the tuple cars is more, okay, so before I continue reading, I already know the fact that they included if at the very beginning of this question, or this requirement, means I'm likely going to use an if statement, so I'm just going to start typing it. So if the number of cars, or the number of times the cope element appears in the tuple cars is more than 45%, print too many copes in the garage to the terminal. If not, print you are all set with the cars. So I'm just going to leave this empty, my if statement. I am going to use parentheses within it. I'll leave it as is. I'm going to do the print statements first because that's relatively straightforward. Just copy the syntax I'm copying this line right here. And then they say, so that's if this first condition is true, the condition I haven't written yet, but if not, they want us to use an else statement to print out, print you are all set with cars. So I just typed this. Okay, so the body of our if-else statement is already done. Now we just need the comparison condition that will print out this first statement. So for that, I did include parentheses here because they want us to calculate the percentage that the cope element appears in the cars. So we did count how many times cope appears in the tuple of cars, and that whole calculation was saved in fav. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do fav first, the variable fav, and then they want us to count the appears in the tuple of cars. So how do we, or like, how would we figure out the total number of elements that appear in this tuple of cars. Well, we actually used a method that gave us that, the length method, and all those calculations were saved in AMT. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do fave divided by AMT in parentheses because I do want this to be executed first, and then I'm going to multiply that by 100. Why? Because when I do fave divided by AMT, it's going to give me a decimal, and then when I multiply it by 100, it's going to give me an actual percentage. Why do I need a percentage? Because I need to compare this number against 45. And if I didn't do the times 100, it would always be less than 45 because it would be a decimal, which would mean the else statement will just always print. The fact that I did times 100 gives me a chance of getting a percentage that's higher than 45. So now I have to use the greater than symbol, because I'm saying if all of this is greater than 45.0, then print out this piece of code, else if it doesn't, then print out this other piece of code. So now if I do python 3 main.py, I get the first line, which is too many copes in the garage. And why do I get the first line? Let me just get my calculator out. So fave, this line of code right here essentially equals 3, because cope appears in the tuple 3 times. And then amount, there are 5 elements in this tuple, so it's 3 divided by 5, which is 0.6. 0.6 times 100 is 60%. Is 60% greater than 45? Yes. Which is why this line printed out. And that's it. So if I press this, it should give me 3 out of 4 checks pass. What? What am I missing? Output is correct. Too many. Oh, I forgot a 0 there, or an O there. They're very specific if you don't write it exactly how you see it over here. Okay, so yeah, 10 out of 10. And that's the second activity. It's relatively straightforward. You just have to kind of, the answer is there, you just have to interpret what they're asking. So I believe that was it. Yeah. So those were the 2 activities for week 8. List, as I mentioned, we've used it throughout the weeks. We've even used list methods before, but I guess for this week we introduced tuples, tuple methods, and we just kind of reviewed the various list methods that do exist. I do think pop was relatively new. Let me see what else. Gonna open up 5.2 again. So pop was definitely a new method. Extend was new. I can't remember if we used append before. We may have, but so that may also be new. But we have definitely used insert before. So yeah, that's week 8. So like I said, there's not going to be another video. I just wanted to kind of include it all in one, which is this video. So don't worry about having to watch the second video next week. There may be a second video. I haven't decided yet. But yeah, I'll see you guys next week.